knew that at some point.
First of all, I just want to thank you all for coming. I know this is an issue that affects everyone in the country at the moment. I think that's why there's so much kind of emphasis on it at the moment, is it's finally passed over and it's starting to affect not just the working class people but everyone. And of course we're talking about housing. It's been an issue for 10 years now, as long as I can remember. It's really come to the boil recently. I'm just standing here, you know, at a protest today. It's an act of defiance. We're in front of the GPO, a reminder of acts of defiance past. There's a James Connolly quote that I love, very famous quote, that says, if you remove the English army tomorrow and fly the green flag over Dublin Castle, if you don't set about organising the Socialist Republic, you'll be in vain. You know, England will still rule you. She'll rule you through our capitalists, through our landlords, through the whole array of institutions in this country.
So, the government is desperately trying to do damage control now. After 15 years, they've realised there's a housing crisis. A housing crisis they cause and benefit from. Fianna Fáil and the Greens set up NAMA and sold off €40 billion of land property and assets to developers instead of building affordable housing. Fine Gael bends over backwards for these vulture and cuckoo funds, allowing them to profit off exploited renters entirely tax-free, and these are the same funds that are taking homes from buyers today. And since 2012, rent has gone up 92% and housing prices are up 98%. Fianna Fáil seems to think that affordable housing is €450,000. So how do we achieve affordable housing? Banning cuckoo funds from the housing market, not slapping them on the wrist with a little extra stamp duty. They swoop in, pay tens of thousands of euro above the asking price on houses. Money is clearly not an object to them, so stamp duty is not a deterrent. They banned cuckoo funds in New Zealand. There's no reason why we can't do it here. We just need political will. We need to get rid of tax loopholes and make speculators pay on the tax that they owe us, and tax vacant properties that could be used for homes. Why are they not being taxed on properties that need to be either rented, sold or paid for? We need to stop selling off the public land that we own to vulture funds at rock bottom prices and start using that land to build public and affordable housing. We need to establish a state-run construction company to provide good wages for workers and add cost housing for those looking to buy. People Before Profit have been calling on a rent freeze since February 2020. Even though Micheál Martin was saying that a rent freeze would be unconstitutional, 3 weeks later he introduces it. We have a right to housing bill which is going to go up into the Dáil on Thursday, and it'll be voted on in 3 weeks' time. You need to lobby your TDs to vote on this. Lobby your TDs to vote on this. Nothing is going to change unless you force your TDs into doing it. The bill is to hold a referendum to create a constitutional right to housing and require government policies are focused on meeting that right rather than assisting landlords and developers to profiteer. It would also remove any argument about rent freezes and eviction bans being unconstitutional.
I don't want to talk in absolutes here, but I feel Darragh O'Brien's position as Housing Minister is untenable. Once it came out that he has investment and his own personal interests in these cuckoo funds, it goes beyond conflict of interest. It's set for years. We've got the register of interests and stuff like that, and TDs will have to declare if they own property and how there's a bit of a grey area there if they own property and they're landlords and they're voting on landlord policy. But I think there's a very big difference between being a landlord and being an adult and investing in cuckoo funds that are getting state funding unbeknownst to everyone. So the one thing I'll say is, I would call for a motion of no confidence in the Housing Minister, Darragh O'Brien. We're talking about by-elections for Fine Gael. The by-election that we're talking about now, it's seemingly, if you're to listen to political correspondence, Varadkar's leadership of Fine Gael is kind of pivoting on. That's there because of the incompetency of the last Housing Minister. And it's one thing that comes up all the time is we fall into the trap of calling Fianna Fáil or Fine Gael incompetent. They're not incompetent at all. They know exactly what they're doing. They are moving public amenities and public funds into the private purse, and it's always the same. We'll see in a couple of years they go off and they parachute into the private sector on brilliant wages, they come back reformed and they go for a senatorship or a presidential election. You know, we see it with Bertie now, we're going to see it in years to come, and I think, you know, we don't really have a mantra here today. I didn't have it in mind, but the one thing that's been running through my head is enough is enough. We've all been here before. This isn't anyone's first rodeo. We've all been on housing protests before. Nothing has changed.
Just to get things kicked off with it, we all talk about how it's an affordability crisis as much as it is a housing crisis. To put things into perspective, my own annual salary is about $24,000 a year. I earn just above minimum wage, decent enough job. I quite like my job, that's the thing. I enjoy what I do for a living. I'm an English language teacher. It's great fun, get to meet loads of people, interesting experiences. I earn €24,000 a year, thereabouts. The average mortgage approval rate for that would be about €84,000. Where the hell am I getting a house for €84,000? They don't exist, exactly. People who are on higher wages fully don't understand how this affects young people and low-paid workers. We are properly shut out of the market. If I were to go renting with that kind of money, I'd be paying around, say, $1,200 a month as well. I'd be left with $600 for whatever else at the end, not including utilities. Can't fucking do that, can we? I'm 27 years of age, I live at home, my sister is 34 years of age, lives at home, and she's a nurse, a public sector nurse, a CNM2 nurse. She earns, don't want to out her altogether, she earns €50,000 a year. She can't find a house for herself or an apartment. It is the affordability crisis as well as a housing crisis, and they don't understand that. Thank you.
Just like to thank everyone for coming here today. I'm going to keep it short and simple. Let's not be London. Let's not be New York. Let's not charge our citizens $2.5 grand for a one-bedroom apartment. There needs to be a massive change in how this country is run. You cannot build good foundations on bad foundations. We need systemic change, and we need it now. Thank you, everyone.
To see this level of mobilisation, to see people out in the streets, you know, nature's healing to an extent, and it's fantastic. I just want to allude to something that's been said earlier. I know we've been talking a lot about the present and what needs to be done now, but I just want to go back to a time past and remember that we're standing in Dublin Docklands. Dublin Docklands were the centre of agitation during the last century. James Connolly and Jim Larkin stood at the turn of the last century to fix the worst housing crisis in the world. 500,000 people living in tenements across the country. Tenements have since been cleared and people have been given, well, some people have been given homes. But realistically, I'm going to ask you this now. What has changed since the day of Connolly and Larkin? What has changed since the slum clearances of the 30s? Absolutely nothing. We still see people in their droves homeless. 9,000 people across this island. 3,000 children homeless, without a home, without a roof over their head. But it's an indictment on the people that are sitting in there and are pontificating on a daily basis from Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael and the Greens that they care about people's lives, they care about the good of all, and they care about housing. They'll chastise the left, they'll absolutely intimidate the left for opposing inadequate and exorbitant housing developments. If there were cardboard houses in the sand on the beaches of this country and the left voted against them, they would chastise them. We stand for decent housing. We don't stand for any housing. We don't stand for housing that is private on public land, and we don't stand for housing that is not going to go to the people that are most vulnerable and the people that need it most. Vulture funds and cuckoo funds have their houses, they have their mansions offshore in the Cayman Islands, in the Middle East and in Asia and across the world. They're not in Ireland. The people who are in Ireland are the people who are struggling to get mortgages and rent. The likes of James, the likes of myself in the future, and all of you here. So one thing I would just like to say is keep up the pressure. I hope to see you all during the week at the protest, and I hope we can really send a message. We're not going to fix the housing crisis, but by God are we going to send a message. And by God are we going to ask this government to look at their conscience and see, can they say whether they are decent people or not. Never mind politicians, decent people. Gormila Mila Mahagi.
Spitballing here, Dave Cowger. I'm not standing here today as an activist or as a socialist, but rather as an ordinary person that has seen time and time again the failures of this government. And when we see housing and when we see failures in housing, it's not just that, but it's public services as a whole. Now, I'm not from Dublin, I'm from South Kildare, and I'm hoping to be starting a PLC course down the Liberties in September. And to do that, unfortunately, there's no work down in South Kildare, and I'd be lucky enough to find work here in Dublin, especially since in the coming months we're going to be seeing layoffs in retail, in the service sector. We're going to be seeing ordinary people laid off from their jobs. So myself and many other young people and students will be lucky enough to find work. And I'm going to be on Susie Grant. Thankfully, I'm eligible for the 100% rate. But I'm going to be spending about 80% of that a month just on public transport alone to get to Dublin. And people from outside Dublin can't afford to rent here. People in Dublin can't even afford to rent here. How can we expect people to live, to get their education, when they can't even have that basic security need of a home? And the people there in the Dáil who sit there in the convention centre and in Leinster House, they don't understand what it's like to be an ordinary person. They don't understand what it's like to be on the breadline. They don't understand what it's like to be scrambling for cash, for a train ticket for education, to make rent each month. And I'm lucky enough, and many people are lucky enough to be born in circumstances. Yeah, I'm lucky enough to be in a household where we manage to get support from the council to be able to get a home. But I see a lot of people, and I think we all need to reflect that we are born into our circumstances by chance. And unfortunately, there are so many people in this country who are on the breadline, who are about to lose their homes, who are dying on the streets each and every night. And unfortunately, those in the halls of power in Irish government don't understand this. And time again, they vote against public housing for public need. Most likely on next Thursday, when the bill for a referendum on the right to housing goes to a vote, Darragh O'Brien and government TDs will stand up and they'll say, oh, well, we can't do this, it's not good for the economy, it's not good for the investors and the developers. Well, quite frankly, who gives two fucks? Who gives a shit as to what matters to those developers? Because at the end of the day, what we need is public housing for public need. We need an overhaul in our public services. We need rent controls. We need income-based rent. We need a national campaign of public homes built on public land. We need to ban the vulture funds and the cuckoo funds. We see that buying up developments around the country. In County Kildare alone, they bought up a couple hundred homes down in North Kildare and Maynooth. And what are they going to do? They're going to buy that above market rate. They're going to rent it out then to desperate students, desperate families who have no other choice. And the people in the halls of power are going to sit back and let that happen. Because at the end of the day, it doesn't suit their interests to bring in public housing. It doesn't suit their interests to adopt a more left-wing and equitable means of public services. Out of the 159 voting TDs, 24 of them, the vast majority being government TDs or independents who are adjacent to the government, are landlords who rent out residential properties. You know that when they vote against housing for public need, that they are voting in their own interests. And what we need to do is send them a message. We need to tell them that the people are sick of what they're doing. We see it time and time again. Since 2007 and throughout history, the vote of Common Gael and Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael and Fianna Fáil has consistently been going down since 2011. Their vote has not made up more than 50% of the popular vote. And if this trend continues, if this trend of people coming out and saying no to Fianna Fáil, Fine Gael, right-wing independents and the so-called progressives that are willing to pop them up, people will see that we need change. People will vote for that change. People will come out to the streets for that change. And mind you, voting isn't just enough. We need to get involved in the grassroots. That means linking in with your tenants' unions, with your local housing campaigns. It means taking direct action and occupying and squatting vacant homes. It means showing that we don't give two shits what matters to these developers. We are fending for ourselves against a government who does not care for the interests of working people. So I'm going to end this here. What we are seeing is a regeneration in the housing movement. Unfortunately, due to the coronavirus pandemic, we haven't been able to be out on the streets. But what we see here today, and hopefully we'll see greater numbers on Thursday at 5 p.m. in support of the right to housing bill for a referendum on public housing. And from now, as you go through the summer, as COVID cases and the restrictions go down, later into the return of the Dáil session, we will see more people out on the streets demanding public services that work for people, public housing on public land, and for a better future for this country. But we won't be getting out with Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael. We need to send them a message, and the Greens as well. We need to send them a message, tell them that the people are not with them, and at the next election, throughout the days and the months and the weeks, and as we stand on the streets, send them a message but the people are not with you, and the people are sick of your bullshit. So I'll end it off with that. Government Margaret to Kelja. Keep up the fight and stay strong and stay safe, of course.
There's loads of capacities that I could be standing here today, but actually I'm standing here today because I am really fucking angry about the state and also about the state of our housing sector. The fact that on average 10 homeless people a month have died since January, and that doesn't shake the establishment to their core tells you absolutely everything that you need to know about the priorities of this rotten government and the rotten governments that have gone before them, that have put a halt to building social housing, that have sold off our public land, that have brought in the investors, brought in the vulture funds, and have done nothing for the people except to line the pockets of the cuckoos, the vultures and the investment funds. They are insidious, they are vile, and they are sinister, and they're actively, with their policies, actively causing death of homeless people, but also, causing huge amounts of mental health implications, causing people to be leaving the country, emigrating, families to be broken up. So there's so many ways that you could describe the impact of this housing crisis. We are the solution. There's going to be, I think, a winter of discontent when it comes to housing in this country. I think people, we all knew that that there was tax breaks there, that there was, ways for investors to make money, that the state was doing everything that they can to facilitate investors being able to buy up large swathes of public land. But when we heard in the last few weeks that the government and ministers and people who are supposed to be looking after the interests of the people are actually aiding and abetting, investing in the very vulture funds that are coming in to rip housing out from under us, that really sparked anger, widespread anger that I haven't seen, and I'm a long time campaigning on housing and homelessness, and I haven't seen that kind of anger before, and that's the kind of anger that I think is going to really come to the fore over the coming week. We are watching you, we are on the streets again, we are mobilising. In September we'll be here when the Dáil opens, in October when we know we can light a match to this tinder that has started, this spark of anger that has inflamed people. We will be on the streets again in our thousands. In our thousands. We are students, we are tenants, we are workers, we are people, we are humans, and we have the right, and we deserve the right to a home. So one last time, whose streets? Our streets!